Okay. Hi, everybody. Oh, it's a couple new faces here. This is the September 16th meeting of the Trempealeau County Personnel and Bargaining Committee. I will call the meeting to order at, well, this is probably like 9:01 or 9:02, something like that. And I'll certify the open meeting law requirements have been met. I think we still have the unamended 12-item agenda, Krista. So I'd entertain a motion by Johnson. Is there a second by Nelson? Any other comments on the agenda? All in favor of approving the agenda as printed, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. It is approved. Fourth item on our agenda today is the approval of minutes from the two previous meetings. We had a meeting on 8/19 and one at 9:01. Is there a motion to approve one or both? Both, or Ron, you want to do both at the same time? Is that okay, Kellen? Okay. Discussion, corrections? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the two sets of minutes from August 19th and September 1st, say aye. 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 Opposed, same sign. They are approved. Now, the much-awaited and exciting compensation study results. There will be a presentation by, who's going to be Krista. All right, Krista Weisenberger will be bringing us our, no, go ahead.
You want me to dive right in?
Yes, just
I'm guessing you want my microphone on for television purposes?
The little red light is on for television, and it actually comes into the room here.
Well, I guess before we dig in, we've had a couple of conversations thus far in the process, and kind of framing your expectations for this morning, I think, is probably important, because we equate this often to flying and landing an airplane. We took off, back in March, and now we're flying at about 30,000 feet and getting ready to descend. And, so hopefully, as we get in, when I talk about, today is about process. How do we get to where we are? What does that mean to you? And in short order here, once we have some general direction, we're certainly not looking for approval of the plan. Of course, this committee, is the recommended, and the board has the final approval authority. But as we, that landing gear comes out, the actual wage schedule is based on, our feedback today. If something we hear today that we're completely crazy, or we're going down the wrong path, or the recommendations are too expensive, that means we have to go back to the drawing board. And what we found, absolute truth of, if we were to release wage schedules this early, and you say, let's change, the disruption it causes inside of an organization is tremendous. And so it's not a matter of trying to hold information back, but rather let's get comfort level with how we're approaching it. And if we're on the same page, then let's have that next level conversation next time of, all right, is this something that now we can sign our name to? So hopefully.
So Patrick, can it just,
Yep.
I sense some nervousness on your part.
No, I
just want to say that not to make you any more nervous. I want you to be comfortable.
Yep.
We're here. We're reasonable people. We're going to be discussing your
Yep.
results, which is what we really want to hear right now.
Yep.
But there's also a bit of a crunch because budget time is coming, and any decisions we make and recommend to
and that's why
finance is going to be part of the budget discussion. So. I don't know, when you were talking about going back to the drawing board, that's when I started to get a little nervous. But, so I'm really looking forward to.
Well, I'm hoping you're not going to tell us to go back to the drawing board, so there's no reason for nervousness. But I also know that if people are online or whatever, that their expectations that we're going to go through position by position and where positions are landing. That's not our intent even a little bit today. That's what I want to make certain. You are absolutely right. Thank you for that observation. So, again, as we talked about this, and kind of this disclaimer here that if, this is all subject to change. And quite honestly, we could get to the county board level, and the county board could say we want to change something. So we just have to say that these numbers and graphs that we'll talk about today could change if you make the recommended changes. I'm not going to go down that path if we don't need to. We've already talked a lot thus far in the process in terms of what's going on in the world. I think it's just important to kind of talk a little bit about it, only because it's not going away and it persists, and it is affecting your departments, your HR function, so on and so forth. Top of the list being that the labor supply. Where are we finding the bodies? and we'll talk a little bit about that with a couple of slides here. The changing nature of the bodies that are coming into the workforce and the expectations that people have. And by the way, this presentation will be available immediately after we're done today. So you don't have to write feverish notes, and there's going to be a couple slides where it's going to be hard to read, but it's more about the point itself. But again, so getting back here, people coming in, changing, and with a lot of that changeover, there's a lot of wage pressure that's going on that we are seeing time and time again. We heard the conversation at the beginning of the year about the potential change in the minimum wage laws at the federal level. It's kind of died, through some political maneuvering. And quite honestly, my opinion is that they would rather have that issue for the election cycle than actually resolve it, but that's a whole different matter. But the point is that businesses themselves are ignoring that, and they're doing what they need to do to bring the bodies in. And we're beginning to see signs of, if you rewind even 5 years, it was probably unheard of to drive down a highway and see a billboard with, hey, here's what we're paying new employees, or come to us, we'll give you $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 sign-on bonus. Now you can't drive down a highway without seeing a billboard or 10, with those very same advertisements. People are desperate to get people in, and those wages at those lower levels are absolutely increasing. So regardless if there's any legislative action, the marketplace is responding accordingly and is putting pressure on wage schedules for that reason. On top of that, we're kind of wrestling with some of the after effects of the pandemic, whether we want to or not. I know we had a little bit of conversation at the very, very front end of this process about, what about remote work? Should there be different levels of pay for people working remotely versus working at the courthouse? And there's some very nuanced pieces of that. But this whole piece of remote work, what we're finding, especially in the public sector, and I worked in the public sector for 19 years, and for 19 years, the response was, we cannot work remotely. Well, guess what? We can work remotely, and we found that out. Now, not all jobs can, and that you have a lot of public service, people-facing jobs where it's very difficult to do that. But I think you're going to see, and we're seeing our public sector organizations face that pressure as employees come back. Well, wait a second, I did this for the last 18 months remotely, why can't I? And so, but that bleeds into the conversation as well as a lot of the social issues that we're dealing with, as it relates to equity and transparency and those sorts of things. Well, the good thing for the public sector, you've got the transparency thing figured out, whether you like it or not. That's, it's part of our open records, open meetings laws. This conversation itself is being held in a public meeting. And the gender and equity pay, the thing that I feel most comfortable about is that our processes are blind, to the whole notion of gender or race, that, we're tested on a regular basis when we do projects in Minnesota. There's pay equity laws that exist there that public sector organizations must comply with, and we pass those tests with flying colors every time that we work on a project. So we have a comfort level that we are non-discriminatory in our practices. So that kind of sets the stage a little bit. I've talked about some of this before. The boomers continue to exit. In fact, last year, I think the number was 1.2 million baby boomers retired more than the prior year, and we're going to continue to see that trend, I think, at least for the next decade. Not a surprise. We've been talking about it for the last 20 years. The bigger surprise is I'm part of the generation that's next, the Gen X, and guess what? Who's reaching retirement age this year, age 55. The Gen Xers are going to be our next wave of retirements. Not going to be as profound effect on the marketplace. We're much smaller than any of the other generations actively, involved in the market. But again, lots of changeover going on. In fact, that prime working age, and this one's a little bit hard to see, and I'm reading it from across the room, and luckily I have nearsightedness, not farsightedness, but so you look at back in 1999, 71.4% of our workforce was that prime working age 25 to 54. In 2009, that dropped down to 67, and in 2019, now we're at 63. The most important and telling piece of this is that we are not expected to grow that working force for the next decade. That's the part that probably, so that tells us that we are in for some of these challenges that we're seeing today in the long term. On top of that, you continue, and you saw this graph, it's been updated since you last saw it, that The numbers are as high as we've ever seen and are as low as we've ever seen. People quitting at the highest level, that yellow line, the how many people are quitting in the workforce versus that orange line, how many people are being laid off or discharged. That gap between those two tells us that people feel more comfortable or have more opportunities for different jobs. But when they leave for different jobs, they're oftentimes leaving for more money to bring the talent in behind them. You often have to pay more money. So it just creates that pressure on a wage schedule. The other part, and I used to have this in a series of 3 graphs and it was just too much, that you see that little oval at the very top of the graph that says 3,063. If I were to stack 2 more graphs on top of this, that's how much of an effect the pandemic had in 1 month's time. That bar goes 2 graphs higher. So this graph stops at 1,000. That number was 3,000 in March of 2020. Pretty eye-opening in terms of the effect of what it had, and the rebound that we've seen. You can see how it dipped, and then all of a sudden, here's that spike all over again. There's a lot of pressure out there, and to supplement that, the one thing I've learned in the last few years is that our Federal Reserve banks do a heck of a lot more than just collect and account for money. They do a lot of really interesting data collection and analysis. And so to kind of support this, the question, and this is from the Atlanta Federal Reserve, that does job switching pay off is their question? And the answer is, well, it sure looks like it, that job switchers on average are achieving about a 4.1% wage increase versus those who are staying at their jobs are getting about a 3.1% wage increase. So a 1% difference between job switchers and job stayers kind of supports that prior graph, that we're seeing it, and again, the other entities are observing that as well.
What's the third line?
Is just the average pay, so it's just the average of those two. Good question. And so for your situation, we've talked about this before, but it kind of helps it make sense. About half of your workforce at or above the age of 50, about a quarter above age 55. You've got some retirement activity coming down the pike. You've had some activity, I would imagine, over the course of the last decade or so. It's going to continue. And the reason why that's important is for 2 reasons. One, your HR department and your departments are going to be busy filling jobs over the course of the next decade, because this does not account for natural turnover. Somebody comes, they go, they get terminated, they follow somebody else, they follow a boyfriend or girlfriend someplace else to a different location, whatever it is. That's on top of that anticipated 51% of the workforce. The other part is you got to fill those jobs, or at least a good portion of those jobs. And so, again, having a competitive compensation structure is very important for that reason. Oh, go ahead.
I know there was quite a bit of employee and management input into this process.
Mm-hmm.
So was the question asked, why are you staying? Or what is it that keeps you here, I guess, is the question. Because clearly the 50 and up group have stayed for some time, or have decided this is where they want to be.
I'll give you, we did not ask that question, but I can tell you some of the reasons that we believe exist is, again, that changeover in generations, that the old model, my model, come and stay a career. I didn't stay for a single employer for a career, but I stayed 19 years in the public sector before then I joined the consulting world. But that mentality of come and stay a career doesn't exist much anymore. I don't want to say it doesn't exist, but it doesn't exist as much. I think the other piece is when we talk about compensation and benefits are, compensation is the attractor and benefits are the retention piece. And so again, what other options are available immediately around here? I think an interesting piece would be, and I used to do this when I was in the public sector, I'd go down to our GIS office and run me a map of our employee locations. Where are they coming from? Do you have a huge portion coming from La Crosse or Eau Claire? Or are they pretty tight-knit here? We just did a similar project for Door County, and that was one of the things that we had them do at that time. And because we had the theory, all of us involved in the project, that everybody from Green Bay was coming up into Door County to work. And the answer was it wasn't as bad as we thought it was. And so the question there, and I think the question here, the third reason why people probably are staying is that Well, I have the choice of going to a La Crosse or to an Eau Claire or someplace else nearby, but I like the feeling of a smaller community. I worked my entire career in mid to small size communities. I liked it. I couldn't see myself working in a larger community. So I think that's probably your third hook that you have with a good portion of employees. But I can't speak for them, but that's what we see. The second factor here, years of service. You've got 40% of your workforce, and I will argue that this number is larger because the data set we received is a few months old. And so therefore, you're going to see more people with less experience with the county. So, but let's just run with the 40% number. Our opinion is that when employees get that 5-year mark of employment with an employer, they found something redeeming with you. You're a good place to work, you're convenient, you pay well, or benefits are well, whatever their individual reasons, going back to your just last question. But that 5-year mark tends to be where people say, okay, I'm going to stick around here for a while, unless something goes haywire. And so our question is, from a compensation standpoint, do you have the pay, the benefits, the environment to keep people here those 5 years and longer? And that's that 40% of the workforce where that threat, if I were using the SWOT analysis language, that threat might occur of, that here's as a group of employees that we want to make certain that we're retaining. We want to retain everybody, but this is probably the one that's probably most in danger from a long-term standpoint. So I wanted to breeze through that as quickly as I could because it doesn't give us much in terms of the meat of what we've done and how we've gotten there. Again, as we've talked about this, and I know as you're dealing with health insurance today, kind of that three-legged stool, that's the second leg, compensation being an important piece, benefits, but also that culture, the experience piece. How do employees engage with you all the way through recruitment, all the way from recruitment through termination? And for us, as we're going to talk about today, what's that market? Who are we comparing ourselves to? How competitive do we want to be? And the secondary question is, how competitive can we be? That's always a realistic conversation. What type of a pay structure? We'll have some conversations around that because I think we're going to make some recommendations for you that hopefully help mitigate costs long term. And then how do we implement? How do you afford and sustain it? And so for us getting to where we are today, what we had to do, and probably what we spend a good portion of our time, is looking at every single job in the study and analyzing it. And that always starts with job documentation. And we're sticklers for job documentation because it's really easy to say that somebody is doing something or a position requires something. It's a different act to put it into writing. And so that's why we really look for written documentation to support that. And then we look at it, okay, what is the job title? Does the title match the duties? All right, here's the duties that we're seeing. How does this line up with the jobs we know exist in the marketplace? And so that first level of analysis, just trying to get our bearings, is this hourly, salaried is another piece that we tend to look at. And then placing those jobs in the organization based on our point factor job evaluation system, which we'll touch on very briefly. But it is, again, allowing us to look at the jobs objectively and kind of stripping away anything that might cloud our judgment, whether it's great employee, terrible employee, male, female, doesn't matter. We're trying to look at the jobs, again, through an objective lens, and knowing that there are going to be times when exceptions need to be made, and having clear strategy or policy or mindfulness of how you're approaching that. And when I talk about that, two prime examples usually exist in organization, not always. Compression, sergeants versus lieutenants, sometimes patrolmen versus road superintendents in a highway department, that if your practices for one group prevent another group from applying for that higher level job, if I'm going to lose $10,000 of overtime to move to lieutenant, I'm still going to work as many hours. Why would I take that promotion? So those sorts of things we look at. Or when the market rate for a job tells us a completely different story than how we observe it from a duty standpoint. I'll give you an example that doesn't apply to you, but it is one that we wrestle with a lot, is if we're working with an electric utility. That to hire an electric lineman, you got to be paying in the neighborhood of $75,000 to $90,000 a year just to get them in the door, or at least that pathway there. And if you're not going to hire the staff you need. Our job evaluation system, based on the duties themselves, might peg it at a $55,000, $60,000 a year job. So if we were to say, well, pay it $55,000, $60,000, we're not doing you any favors. And so we have to be mindful of what the market is doing on top of the job evaluation system. So for us to build your structure, again, we've talked about this before, but now it's getting real as we begin to land this plane, that every job is looked at for 5 main factors, but each of those factors, and really where the work occurs, are those sub-factors. What thinking challenges and problems are you asking the employee to solve on a regular basis? And how complex are they? Are they pretty straightforward? I don't have to worry about it. My job is pretty narrowly focused, and I just go about it, and there's not much there, versus jobs that are incredibly complex challenges and problems, affecting the safety or welfare of people, or affecting large amounts of money, whatever it might be. And then what type of response do I need to give? Is it, again, narrowly focused versus fairly expansive in terms of the administration of the organization? Then we talk about, and I won't go through each one of these in exhaustive detail, but then knowing what the problems that you're wrestling with, how much decision-making authority are you giving that classification? Is it at a high level, usually what you'd expect of a manager or department head, or is it more of I'm participating, contributing information, providing input as necessary, those sorts of things, but I'm not necessarily making those decisions? And kind of in between, we have a couple categories, depending on the level, of people participating in that decision-making process, but not necessarily making those decisions. So that's the next factor. And the other one being the interactions. Who are you working with inside and outside the organization? And the types of interactions. Are you relaying information, or are you trying to coax and persuade people to do things that they might not otherwise want to do? And again, the type of outcome that has. Are you providing information? Are you causing people to say, oh, I didn't think of that before? Are you controlling, enforcing, or are you working on big level policies or governance issues with the county? So those first 3 levels are pretty deep, and we spend a lot of time in just those first 3, because it kind of is the heart and soul of our system and the heart and soul of any job. And those next 2 are a little bit more obvious as we work our way through it. The work environment. What are the types of things that can hurt you versus the physical requirements of the job? And then knowing all of those other things, what do you need for education and experience to fill that job? Again, not what the employee has. That's helpful sometimes, but more importantly, what do you need to fill that? And so every single job in the study was reviewed based on these 5 main factors or 11 sub-factors. And when we do this, and this chart is not your organization, it's a sample organization, but this is what we end up looking at is, so for example, we have a supervisor there that is, the alphabets and letters and numbers, 4C plus 4PP. They go all the way to the right. 6D in our language, for example, is a bachelor's degree and 4 to 5 years of experience. A 1L for work environment is it's an office job with no physical requirements or very, very limited physical requirements. So each of those rating levels means something to us. Where the rubber hits the road are the numbers. There's point values associated with each one of those, and we can then structure the organization to say, okay, this job has 1,300 points, and the bottom job has 323, and now we have to group those jobs together for grade purposes. So we might look at a job and say, okay, for the unskilled laborer and the receptionist, 323, 324 points, maybe that is grade C or whatever, and from 300 to 324 points is that grade. The next grade might be 400 to 450 or 500 to 600, just depending how you layer it, but that's how we begin to build a hierarchy for an organization. So now let's flip it to your own information. First thing we did is, this is you. Now, most what you can see from now on is going to be related directly to you, is that along that bottom axis of that graph is our observation of each job. The job evaluation score, for each one. So you can see there's an outlier there right around 700 points. And so that's our job evaluation score, and the pay being, I'm trying to read across the room here. What's that? Oh, no, I know it's current. I was just trying to read the number, but it doesn't matter. But so each benchmark job, this is not every job in your organization. These are the jobs that we felt we could match adequately to the outside marketplace. And the first thing that I can observe with this, and probably the only thing that I can observe with this reliably, is that as duties and responsibilities increase, in our view, your current pay practices have a general increase as duties and or paid increases as duties and responsibilities. There's a decent relationship. It's not perfect, and this is based on the current actual pay and not the midpoint. So again, there's going to be a little bit more variation because we've had people who've been here a little bit longer. So not bad. We don't have a lot of things we need to really fix from, there's no major discrepancies, a couple dots here and there. But then we need to talk about the market, and hopefully as we dig into the market, some of those variations off that line tighten up a little bit. And as we talk about that market, and as we've talked about before, the notion of who is like us, big deal, but also who are we competing with? And that, sometimes that brings in larger organizations. And so as we've talked about it, as we worked our way through a pretty healthy listing, which allows us to avoid one organization dragging that number up or dragging that number down. You're trying to get to what's the reasonable position in the marketplace. And also pulling in other data relating to BLS. They do a pretty decent job of regionalizing it. You're in the western MSA for Wisconsin. Pay Factors, which is one of our data sources. Comp Data, a paid survey source that also has some regionalized data, as well as Willis Towers Watson. So we've got a really good data set that we can begin with. And so from that standpoint, we also have to ask and answer that question of, and I think I touched on it at the beginning of the presentation. I'll just talk quickly because you're making that discussion today. And so it's probably as perfect a time to have that conversation of what role do benefits have in your compensation structure. The first answer is none. And first answer is none. Now, but my second answer that's equally important is that it comes out of the same budget. That as county board supervisors, you have to manage a budget, and to you, they're both equally problematic. If wages are going up and benefits are going up, the question is where do we find the money to afford it as it comes up? But I think as I said earlier, that wages are what brings people in the door. Benefits are what keeps people here. And I'm not saying that they're not important in the recruiting process, because they're very important. But I think, after 19 years, I could ask Krista and Rochelle, who've also worked in the HR space, usually the conversation on benefits comes long after they've even applied for the job. It's after the first or second interview, after an offer of employment. And some people, it's after they show up on your doorstep for the first day of work and remind me again what my benefits are. So again, it's not that they're not important. They're incredibly important, and they're incredibly expensive. But our advice to every organization who has a question about what role do benefits play is deal with your compensation issue and deal with your benefits issue appropriately. That you have to have competitive pay, you have to have competitive benefits, and in making those decisions. So you might make the decision to say, well, if we're going to have competitive pay, then we're better off, maybe we can make some decisions on benefits that would be, align us more with the marketplace, where maybe before we hit the pause button and didn't, hit the gas pedal as hard. So again, I don't want to discount the role of benefits, because they're hugely and wildly important to the employees and to the overall budget, but this is a separate and distinct process from that. In terms of that market competitiveness piece, I flip these around. I'm going to go backwards here. Here we go. I want to talk about this slide first. So this slide right here is simply a matter of substituting out same dots on the graph or same jobs on that graph. All we're doing is switching out the current rates of pay for the market rates of pay. So now this is just simply a graph of your market in line with your benchmark jobs. And as you can see, there's two or three things. One, the variance off that line is tightened up a little bit. That's ideally what we like to see. There's always going to be some variance, but as long as we're accounting and getting rid of any major outliers, so we have a good model. And when I talk about our model, what benchmark employers are we using? The job evaluation scores, the surveys, so all those other things contribute to that model. And of those two lines with numbers on them, I'll talk about one now and I'll talk one in just in a couple minutes, that R squared. The technical term for that is the coefficient of determination. The layman's version of it is how confident are we in the model that we've built for you. And so 96%, if we get to 90, we could build a pay structure with some degree of confidence. And not, it's not to discount, with a relatively high degree of confidence, I should say. Once we get to 95, we feel we've got a really good model, and anything above 95 is really just kind of chipping around the edges. So 96% of the variance off that line reasonably can be explained by our model. That 4% could be anything. It could be a high payer in the marketplace. It could be, a slight mismatch in duties of the respondents in any survey or whatever. 4% variance, again, from what we're looking at is pretty standard. So what does that mean from a competitive standpoint? So looking just at your current actual pay, do you know what our ratio is, Rochelle? I forgot to put that on here. Is it 95? Okay. But it doesn't matter what the ratio is. I always caution people when looking at this line. It tells a little bit of a deceiving story. It's not intended. I mean, this is the best way we know how to at least tell you overall, the management level wages are creeping up a little bit more in the marketplace than what we see at the lower level of the organization, but it does not mean that every job at the bottom of the organization is just fine. There's going to be issues where we have to catch up, and it doesn't mean that every job at the top of the organization is behind. Their jobs are just fine. It just means overall this is what it's looking like for you. And this is based on current pay. And as we were talking before in the meeting, about 3 o'clock in the morning, I wake up and it's like I had a thought and I had to put it in this morning. That this next graph, you can see a very faint red line below the black line. Those are your current midpoints of your structure. So black line being the current actual pay, the red line being the midpoints. So it tells me a couple of things. And I don't know necessarily which one is true, but I have a pretty decent idea that they're probably both. That either A, you have some long tenured employees, which you do, and you've had some turnover, and you've maybe had to hire a little bit further up into the wage schedule than what you might otherwise feel comfortable with. So from that standpoint, the midpoints being lower than the current actual pay doesn't surprise me at all, but I thought it was at least worthy of, where do we stand from an individual standpoint and in a structural standpoint, and that's what those two lines are telling us. We already talked about that one. So talk briefly about philosophy and strategy. I don't want to get too bogged down in this, but a lot of these questions as we work our way through a project are being answered in some way, shape, or form. And some of these will be answered through your deliberations or through your continued administration. The hierarchy. How are you placing jobs in the organization? Well, right now, as we talked about, point factor job evaluation combined with some common sense views of compression and marketplace. What's important to you? And that's one of those where we can guess and we can try to observe, those things through your comments. But a lot of times, for example, we'll see a strategic planning document coming out of an organization that says, we want the best and brightest employees. That's great, and that's a very lofty and laudable goal, but that usually comes with a price tag. As opposed to a philosophy or a value that we want to be competitive in the marketplace. It means two completely different things. So again, what are your values and what are you seeking? Another value that sometimes is that we believe that an employee's contributions to an organization are at the top of the list. To the exclusion sometimes of even tenure, that we want to pay the top performers. And that comes with some requirements as well that we can also talk about. Talent strategy. Where are you finding your employees? And again, how are you doing that? And what types of employees are you trying to recruit? And so it really bleeds into this, the not only discovery of who you are, but also the strategy of where you're trying to find people. The marketplace we've talked a little bit about, where do you want to be in the market? Who is your market? How are you going to deliver pay? There's a couple, things with that. Are you going to pay, that if I were a private sector organization and if we were a sales organization, you could say, we're going to pay maybe just a little bit competitive, but we're going to pay excellent, in terms of incentives and that for people who meet or exceed their goals. That could be one way of delivery, or we're going to be fairly uniform in our approach, or we're going to, that we, step-based models, those sorts of things. But that also contributes to that sixth point of performance. What role does performance play in this conversation as it relates to pay? Very few public sector organizations have true pay for performance in their models. I can give you a million reasons why it doesn't work and probably 500,000 why it does. And I think, there are more reasons why it doesn't, but I think it's still an important function of managers and of human resources to, at the very, very least, have an annual evaluation process that is not only talking to an employee about how they did last year, which they should know by the time they get to the evaluation, but also what do we want for you next year and the years out. And so again, that performance, whether or not you ever tie it to pay, is still an important piece of the puzzle. Transparency, we already talked about, you've got that built in. I don't want to say you shouldn't worry about it because there's still things that you can do to be more transparent. Compliance, as it relates to wage and hour compliance or pay equity law. And then that notion of, okay, how often are we going to review this? That this should not be a document that you just blow the dust off of every 10 years. That, in fact, we just delivered a presentation last week at Lambeau Field to a group of public and private sector employers about this very notion that when times get tough, instead of, panicking in terms of what do we do, the first stopping point along the way is, how do we approach this philosophically? Do we need to shift our philosophy? I have a couple clients right now who are actively engaged in, all right, we're having a terrible, terrible time finding people to work on our water distribution crews or our wastewater collection system crews. What do we do? And instead of just making a decision in the dark, let's talk about strategy. Maybe we should be paying at the 60th percentile of the marketplace instead of the 50th. And so they're exploring that. So they're not making quick decisions, they're making contemplated decisions so they don't regret it down the road. So that kind of sets the stage for what we're talking about next, the variables that we also have to consider. How do employees move through a structure? How do they get placed? And we talked a lot about these already. How many structures? We're proposing one structure for you. In the public sector, sometimes there are certain environments where two structures make sense. But what we found is that more and more organizations that, if we can, we'd like to have a one-size-fits-all or a common structure for everybody. Also have to take into account, and probably part of this conversation today is the budget limitations or financial pressures that you have.
Can you talk for a minute, Patrick, on what do you mean by multiple structures in place at the same time?
So we're doing a project for a county right now that they've got the normal county organization, but they also have a nursing home. And the nursing home, just with the data that exists and the different types of competitive pressures, but it starts with having fantastic data. The Leading Age, the association that represents the nursing homes, does a fantastic survey every year, and we're able to then pull in that data. It just makes more sense to have a separate structure. It just works. Every time I've seen it, it works better. With cities, libraries are oftentimes a separate structure. When I work with private organizations, sometimes we have to take the technical jobs and place them in a different structure for competitive reasons. So that's usually those decision points that come along the way. Oh, that's good. The types of structures that are available to you, the single rate structure is very uncommon. It still exists. And my only notation with that is if we were to go with a step or a single rate structure, that it puts a pressure on you to be on the market or aware of the market every single year. There's no room for error with a single rate structure. With a step-based model, it's more compact, so you can see, I try to use my laser pointer, but it won't show up on a TV screen, that purple model, the performance-based, goes down to 80% of the marketplace and up to 120%. The green model, the step model, is more compact than that. Because, and I hate using this word, and I know that I'm being broadcast here, so I want to be very careful, but step models tend to be at least from an outside observers, more automatic in nature in terms of the movement from step to step. Usually it's an annual basis. Sometimes we'll see every other year. But usually the supposition is only one, you hear another year, but hopefully what the other criteria is, did you at least meet the expectations of your job this last year as well? And if you haven't, there should be at least a conversation of should the employee receive even a step increase. And so even though it's not pay for performance, because that next level down, that purple one, every raise from the minimum to the maximum is dependent about what the employee contributed in terms of performance the last review period. There's no automatic increases that are involved with it. Again, it's a true performance model. And that bottom one, that blue one, is a combination of those two, is simply saying that we're going to get employees to a control point in a reasonable fashion, usually 4 to 6 years. That if you're not paying at that rate for somebody who's fully educated and acclimated to the job in that period, you might have other problems. But then beyond that control point is where the performance piece kicks in. And so organizations saying, we want to move you from the minimum to the control point reasonably quickly, and everything else, again, is based on what you are able to provide and contribute to the organization. Based on our conversations thus far, our recommendations will be for a step structure, but it's going to look a little bit different than what we have up on the screen, and we'll get there in just a moment. This graph is exactly what you saw before. It's the market graph, but I want to talk about that first, the equation, the y equals equation. Really, all this equation means is that for every job evaluation point, the line inches up 4.5 cents, 0.0451, plus $1 or $3.56. So that's the equation for the slope of that line, that gray line. But that then allows us to help build a structure for you based on the combination of the job evaluation that we did and the market data. So those two variables on that graph allow us to build that structure. And how we do it, and I do not expect you to be able to read any of those numbers on that screen right now. It's just two or three things that I think are important on this. First of all, grade 10 that we're proposing for you, how do we arrive at that number? I think would be a very valid question if you were to ask us. And so $31.71 is the control point for grade 10. How do we get there? If I flip back just quickly here, that equation, y equals, I just transferred over to this slide then. And the only thing that wasn't in there before that I need to explain is that grade 10, the point values range from 600 points to 649. And so the middle value of those two numbers is 624.5. So that's where that 624.5 comes in. We just plug that into the equation, and that comes out to $31.71. We can repeat that for every single grade to help build that structure for you. So again, it's not pulling numbers out of thin air. It's actually using, again, the marriage of the point factor and the market scores to build those grades for you. Just a quick compensation 101 conversation, because it plays into even how a step structure works. So if we were working with you on a merit structure, many organizations, and we use versions of this, the numbers will vary, but the concept stays the same, even in many of our private sector projects. But let's just talk about meeting expectations. We don't need to talk about any of the others. The general thought process that exists is that at the front end of a pay schedule, so if I hire you at the bottom, we want to move you along. We want to get you to a competitive wage as long as you're contributing. So maybe if you meet expectations this year, you're going to get a 4% increase next year. Then, once you get to that second quartile, right before the midpoint, but a little ways into it, maybe you're only going to get a 3% for meeting expectations. Now you're at the control point, and moving beyond it, if you're meeting expectations, we're going to slow you down a little bit. We still want to advance you, but percentages off higher numbers mean more. 4% off $10 is more than 2% off, or is $15, is probably, again, a similar, equation or a number. And then when you get to the very tail end of the schedule, you might only get a 1% for meeting expectations. Incredibly common, and again, that notion of let's make certain that we are moving people through, but it's not a race to the top. And I think that's the most important thing, is that it's almost never how quickly can I get to the max. From an individual employee standpoint, I understand that, and that's a conversation, that is absolutely a conversation, is how quickly can I get there? So for here, our step structure, and again, numbers are hard to read, that's why, we want to make certain you get a copy of this afterwards. But when we say a step is, you have a step at 97.5%, 95, 92.5, 90, 87.5%, it's not 2.5% of the prior number, it's always off the control point that we're doing those calculations. And so from step 1 to step 2 is going to be a higher number than 2.5. Then as you get closer and closer to that control point where it is 2.5, and then beyond that, and this is actually what we're going to recommend for you. So, and then we'll show this on the next slide here, one of the next slides.
Clarify that, okay. So are you suggesting that for every percentage raise, let's go to say step 14, the 1.7%, I think that is, that would be 1.7% of the control point, or of the previous?
It will be the way the numbers work, and I think do I have it on a? I'll go back here for a second. I'm used to having my computer where I can just navigate through slides really easily here. So what we are recommending is from steps 1 to 6, 2.5% between between grades. And so that would be control point at 100%. That's the main number. 97.5% of the control point, 95% of the control point, 92.5 all the way down to 87.5. And then above the control point, I've had conversations over the years with organizations who have said, well, what if we take those steps above a control point and make them every other year? So those 2.5% steps. It helps save us money. The feedback that we consistently get was, well, from an employee standpoint, waiting every other year for that it just seems, they don't like it. I'm not saying it doesn't make sense, because back in the old union negotiation days, you might have the contracts where your increases might be 2, 3, 4, 5 years apart in terms of the steps. And so that one doesn't hold as much water with me. But also the conversation of, the tracking that's involved. Do we, making certain that we're keeping on top of the payroll piece. But by and large, getting employees through a pay structure, in a normal pay structure in 10 years is reasonable. And even in this one, from min to max would take an employee 15 years to navigate through. But the reason why we're doing this is not just to help mitigate cost of the movement through the step structure. It's because of the 2 decisions that you're faced with every year that nobody loves making. And that is, what's the market moving? So this year we're having conversations of a survey. In fact, I'll have it up here in just a moment, but is the market going at a 2% clip? Or according to what we're seeing recently, is it moving at a 5-6% clip? And we've had any number of conversations over the years of, well, what role do some of these other measures, such as the Social Security increase that is get frequently talked about, that if we rewind 2 months ago, they were forecasting it about 4.1%. Now that number's at 6.1% for next year that they're predicting for that.
I know.
But, well, you might like it, but you won't like it also that gets gobbled up pretty quickly. That they're talking about Medicare premiums increasing, the price of fuel, the price of milk, the price of everything else it's usually a measure of how much has everything else increased. So those increases, if you're talking CPI, is what do I need to maintain the standard of living? And so.
Part-time job.
So that first, that conversation you have every year, well, do we increase wages by 1.5%, 2.5%? That keeps your structure competitive with the outside marketplace. So that's the first conversation. The second conversation is, well, how do we move employees through the grade to which they're assigned, step by step or performance-based? And it's not uncommon to engage in a conversation, a very legitimate one, where we're going to give a 2% across the board, and an employee is going to get a 2.5% step increase, so that 4.5%, that seems like a lot. And so there's usually some heartburn associated with it, understandable. And so what we're trying to do with this secondarily is Those 2.5% steps to the control point, my opinion, they're necessary. You need to keep moving in that direction. Beyond that control point, I don't have as much heartburn of slowing that down as we had in that prior slide. This is based off an 11-step structure for example purposes only. But instead of a 2 plus 2.5, it becomes a 2 plus 1.25. And it just helps mitigate that cost to allow you to continue to keep moving through that structure. And again, these.
Well, your second point there having to do with maintains internal balance,
Yep.
is this also start to address the compression issue?
There's different types of compression. That's one type of compression, and we'll talk about that in just a moment here. That you've got. No, you're good. In terms of increases, and again, these are really hard to know. I just know these numbers in terms of what's happening. That we do a survey, which we'll see on the next slide here. But World at Work, Salary.com. I could probably rattle off 10 to 15 different organizations from around the state or country that do different salary planning surveys every year. And for the last decade or so, two numbers have been relatively true. Salary structures have increased by 2%. That's pretty uniform for the last decade or maybe even 2 decades with World at Work. And salary budgets, how much am I budgeting for my overall salary allocations, whether it is merit, steps, or anything else, is at 3%. And the first reaction I see is, well, wait a second, 2%, that only leaves 1% for the other things that are going on. The numbers don't add up. Well, that also accounts for is vacancy and turnover. Employee leaves up here in a pay structure, bring a new employee in, maybe not as low as you used to, but still lower, hopefully. There's that which kind of contributes more money into that process. But then when you're out, like in a merit-based environment, presumably somebody's getting a 0 and somebody's getting a 5%. So those numbers tend to average out. So those budgets being 2 and 3%, plus there's other allocations that are built into that. And again, you can see it much more easily on a printed version of this. Our survey, which hopefully will be published right around the noon hour today, if not sooner. We've conducted it for the last 8 years, about 5 years now with the private sector included. This is a view of the Midwest, but we also break it down by states and regions of the participating states. But the two main questions, we ask a bunch of questions, but the two main ones are, what did you do last year? That's the easiest one. We should be able to tag on that one pretty quickly. And what are you planning for 2022? Well, those numbers came in relatively consistent with what we're seeing in the surveys, maybe a little bit above. That for non-exempt, non-union, or exempt non-union in the public sector, about 2.2% structural growth for 2022 versus 1.9 in 2021. The budget, that tells me a story as well, that there's some things going on where there's probably not as much movement when there's only like a 0.3 or 0.4 difference from structure to budget. In the private sector, and this is an important piece to, I think, be mindful of, non-exempt, non-union, or exempt salaried, 2.8 versus 2.5. A little bit more money being placed into the structures at the private sector level, and even a little bit more money consistent with what we've seen, about 3.2% being plugged into budgets. Why I said this is important is the last 3 or 4 surveys, the private sector has outpaced the public sector by about 0.4 to 0.6%. So I'll just say 0.5 for the sake of this conversation. 1 year in a survey, that's not a big deal. 2 years, something we need to be mindful of. But what we're seeing is consistently the private sector outpacing the public sector. Makes perfect sense. Budgets are limited. You don't have wild ability to increase prices or fees or other things that would be more options in the private sector. But we're seeing that. So again, lots of things going on in that environment. Then when we get to this whole notion of affordability and implementation, one, budget's always and we've talked about that a couple times. We've talked about the notion of fairness previously, that we have zero control over an individual employee's happiness. I think we have a reasonable amount of control over what's fair. Now again, fair is also in the eye of the beholder, but usually you can point to say, we're not making a decision based on discriminatory factors or whatever, that you can at least nod your head a little bit or a lot of it in the direction of fairness. And two challenges we frequently see, I think this will cut to the heart of one of your questions, two challenges we see with implementation, and you've done this before, this isn't your first rodeo when it comes to compensation. Two challenges are the size of the increase. That one of our implementation options would be simply moving employees to the step in the new structure that provides an increase in pay. That could be a penny. And so if I'm an employee that says, we went through this whole process, and I had these high expectations, and next year I'm going to get $20.80 based on 2,080 hours for increase next year. I don't like that. And depends on where the situation is. It could be that penny is my immediate view of the world, but 3, 4, 5 years down the road, I've got $5,000 more earning potential that I never had before as a result of the implementation. So again, it just depends on that situation, but that is a very real challenge that we wrestle with. The second one is it's usually difficult, if not impossible, to recognize everybody's years of service. I've been here 15 years, I think I should be at the top of the pay structure. I've been here 5 years, I think I should be at least at step 4 or step 5. I get it. I can flip myself around to the other side of the table. I can make the employees' arguments for them. I mean, I understand completely the value of tenure in the organization. It comes down to cost, and it comes down to money, and we'll talk about that very quickly here. And so sometimes there are unintended compression at the bottom of a pay scale. So let's just say an individual job is a little bit behind the marketplace, and you're trying to catch it up with this study. So you might have employees who have been here 10, 15 years go down to step 2 or 3. And their question, a legitimate question, wait a second, I've been doing this. I know where the bodies are buried. I know how the processes work. Why aren't I higher, and why am I down with people who don't have the same wealth of knowledge? Get it? And so that's why we have other options available, but every option costs just a little bit more, and so we want to make certain that you're... And then the other thing I just want to touch on when it comes to implementation, because I've seen this, and so I just at least need to say something, is this notion of making exceptions. And again, I know we've talked through this slide before, but making exceptions for one employee without a foundation for it just sets the stage for the next employer, next group of employees to come in and say, now it's our turn. And that's how pay plans, I've seen several just go awry just with that inability to say no or wanting to please people. And that's, again, why when we look at these on behalf of clients, we're looking at the job evaluation score or the market data. So again, we're getting back to that notion of fairness, that we're going to do an evaluation based on objective things as opposed to the emotions that might come with compensation. So let's talk money. This is kind of one of the main reasons why we're here, is because, like you said, we're talking about budget, so we need to paint a...
Is this a draft, by the way?
This, I should have put it on the slide a little bit more. Well, in all reality, actually, that's probably a good question, because we made some pretty significant changes the last couple of days as we tighten up our analysis and our data. With a whole bunch of changes to some of the matches and some of the scores, that first option changed by $4,000. That's important to note, because even as we continue to tinker, and I guarantee you we're going to have a couple more conversations on a couple jobs here and there just to make certain that we've done as good a job as we can, that number's not going to swing wildly. That it's going to stay, in fact, I think when we talked, about some, initial number that, it's going to be below $300,000, kind of, setting the expectation of where it's going to fit below. But that first line, the step that provides an increase, is the cheapest way of implementing the structure, or at least out of the box, it's the cheapest way. I mean, you can come up with cheaper ways. That next line, and it's not, these don't add on top of each other, these are separate costs for each different option. What if we were to recognize everybody's years of experience? That's always the most expensive option, or among the most expensive options. So let's have the two bookends established. So $239,000 for, or 2% of payroll for the cheapest option, step provides an increase, or 8.82% at about $1 million and change for the step that recognizes everyone's years of service. You're the decision maker, so I'm not gonna make those decisions. It's usually my supposition that organizations either don't have the political will or the money to pay for that step that recognizes everyone's years of service. But we have to give it to you, so you at least kind of know the boundaries that you're working within. That third line is one of a couple other options that helps mitigate the cost, or helps mitigate some of the compression, or helps mitigate some of those problems. So in this particular example, what the theory is behind it is, well, we were thinking about giving a 2% raise to employees next year. That was kind of, in our design. And we want to make certain that employees get at least that 2% raise. You could say 1.5%, you could say 1.75, but in this example, at least a 2% raise. But it's also important to note what this is not doing, is that if I am an employee who, oh goodness, to get to the minimum of the structure, I'm going to get a 3.5% increase. Just that's going to get me on the structure. It's not adding 3.5 plus 2%. It's saying that you've already gotten your 2% in that 3.5% lift. And so it's not double counting that for people, but that number is about 3.5% of payroll, or about $413,000.
So this third option is a way of avoiding the 1 penny raise.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Two things, or I guess they go hand in hand, and I'll go with this until I'm proven wrong. This does not include any roll-ups to those wages. So FICA taxes, 7.65%. You give a penny in or $1 in a raise, you have to pay, the organization is going to have to contribute 7.65% in Social Security, Medicare taxes. Retirement, 6.5, 6.55, or whatever that number is for next year, that goes up with it. So that number is usually between 15 and 20% on top of this. But what we've found is that several of your departments, certainly not all, have revenue sources to offset some of those increases. Land conservation, child support, court system, human services. What we've observed is that number of offsetting revenue for those costs is between 15 and 20%. And again, if I'm ever proven wrong, I'll change my story, but that's kind of what we've seen. So that's why we're not giving you a number that's 15 to 20% higher based on the roll-ups. It's a wash, and it's just easier to talk about base wages with this. I'm going to pause here. I know there have been questions asked during this, and I'm winding down here, but this is really the one where, if from a budget planning standpoint, I know a lot of this is, well, it depends on how other things shake out. I would expect to hear, in terms of, what you're planning. But if we're completely crazy at that last line, then we need to go back to the drawing board. Does that need to be a 1.5%? Do we need to go with that first line option? Or do we need to figure out a different option that meets your expectations? And so I would love any questions, observations, concerns, and just kind of work from there.
I don't think you're crazy. So
I'm crazy, but not for that
I'll
reason.
put that out there.
Please, it's your.
So just a little bit of a feedback on this, so I know.
Can I ask my question first?
Yeah.
Just as a clarification. So when we're looking at the overall package, what you have got and what that represents the finances of it.
Yep.
But it also represents every employee, every position placed on a pay scale that has been adjusted, or a different pay scale than the one we're on in terms of where midpoints are and so forth. And those jobs are now placed appropriately on that based on your research.
Correct.
On that pay scale, and every employee will have gotten at least a 2% increase, and some will have gotten more because of a placement on the pay scale.
Yes, and let me add one more thing to that. The pay scale we're giving you is valid for 2022. So you don't have to say we need to add another 2% to the pay scale, that you have a 22
Okay, I
structure.
understand that, but I just wanted to be sure that
You are correct.
there's also a different pay scale, and all the employees have been placed on that new
Absolutely.
pay scale. Okay. Krista, sorry for interrupting.
That's okay. So just to give some history on this, so typically departments would budget for the next step every year. That's what we would tell everybody to put into their budgets, and then once personnel bargaining would meet, we would determine what that cost of living adjustment would look like every year. So this year, departments were doing the same thing. They all budgeted for the next step increase within the current pay structure. So keep in mind, even though you're seeing this wage cost of implementation, there's approximately $243,000 that departments have already budgeted for. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
That was it?
That was simple. It's a rough number, but about that.
So in terms of where we're landing here, you know, we've got the costing, we've got the structure, you know, the debatable point, I just want to make certain something here. Yeah, okay. I just want to talk quick, we had a question beforehand, before this meeting started about an appeals process. And what does that mean? And I think because we're talking numbers, I want to talk to you about the appeals process conceptually, but also what it might mean financially, because I think sometimes people get afraid of an appeals process that's going to add numbers to it, and that's not at all what happens. So for our appeals process that we recommend, it is absolutely your choice if you want to engage in it, is that and we do this to mitigate cost, that, and to make it hopefully a more seamless process, we get done with the process. And the reason why we say we get done with the process is because everything is drafted until it's adopted. It could be changed up to the last moment, so we don't know what somebody's appealing. But after it's done, you know, allowing the employees to appeal their placement, the reason why we do this in the public sector is because everybody knows what everybody else gets paid. It's just, so dotting the i's, crossing the t's is the first layer, is what we call the pre-appeal phase. The employee says, I have a question, doesn't make sense to me, or I have a curiosity or whatever. We provide employees with the rating levels for their job and their job alone. It's not a matter of, I want these 10 other jobs. We're going to talk about your job, the job that you're doing, so we don't get into this, well, what about this, what about that? Again, we want to make certain we're focusing the intent of the process, and we're also focusing on the information that they're getting. And we completely understand that there's more context in our job evaluation system that somebody reading a quick document could reasonably get, but we're at least trying to provide them information how our system works. So we'll give them the rating levels for their job. So when we talked before about that one job being a 6D, education and experience, a 1L for work environment, again, sharing some information about what those different levels mean, and then the employee looking and saying, well, yep, that's enough information for me. I'm done, thank you. I don't need to go any further. Where other employees look and say, no, I have some serious misgivings about this. That's where the formal appeal process, but again, narrowing it to the point of, one, their own job, and two, the rating levels. And the reason why we don't provide points, and I forget if I've talked to you about this before, but is a common conversation. I would say probably 99 times out of 100, if I say to an employee, your grade is 595 points, or your job is 595 points, and the next grade is 600, the only question I ever get, is, what do I need to tell you? What words do I need to use to get to that next grade? That's not our goal. Our goal is to evaluate the jobs fairly and appropriately, and if they fall into a different grade, then they do. So that's why we're only providing the rating levels and not the points. From your standpoint, as we're talking finances, now that I've closed that loop, is, say Krista appeals, and she says, well, right now this job is placed, I'm going to use fake numbers here. You know, I'm getting paid $25 an hour today. That the appeal, or the recommendation is to get paid $25, and the step that she was placed on represented maybe a 10-cent increase. She might get placed in it, so she might say, well, I'm going to go from a grade 10 to a grade 11. But the step might actually be less than upon implementation. It just, very slightly. So I still, even with an appeals process, maybe a cushion of a fraction of a percent, but it's not going to go up by much at all, and if at all. I've had appeals processes where the actual final number goes down because a person appealing gets a new grade, which means long-term they have more earning potential, but short-term they get placed based on the implementation strategy. So from a financial burden of, okay, we're going to, as a county board, we're going to make a decision based on an assumption of, say, $250,000 or $450,000, whatever that number is this consultant going to come in and undermine everything we did financially. And again, that's almost, in fact, it's never the case that we see major shifts upwards in terms of cost. So I just want to make certain that I think you still should discuss, whether or not an appeals process is an appropriate course of action. But if you do, just as long as you can do so knowing that it's not going to add significant amounts of money to the final result, I think is important.
I'll speak historically. I think our dissatisfaction with the previous wage compensation study had a lot to do with communication up front, the process itself, and also the lack of an appeal process. So it's clear that you've went a significant distance beyond that in terms of making sure all the steps of the process were covered in terms of getting the information about the job description,
Sure.
the documentation, as you say, and involving people along the way. So there you go with the fairness issue again, is an appeals process, an opportunity for someone to discuss why and how and what if is there, would be reasonable.
And I think, kind of zeroing in on the fairness conversation, because with normal implementation, there will be people who are not happy, and with an appeals process, there will be people who are not happy. But I can look somebody in the eye and say that we are at least fair in our approach. And the other part, and whether it is jobs shifting or whatever it might be, that if there's something happening to that job that is different than what's currently the situation, we've probably looked at that job more than any of the other jobs in the process, just to make certain that we're not kind of upsetting the apple cart too much from some consultant riding into town, changing everything without much consideration for kind of the organization's values. So we're pretty careful about that.
We have a decision to make. Our recommendation goes to exec finance, who then works that into the budget process. My experience is that they take our recommendation and then shift all the other numbers to accommodate that. Correct me, Krista, if I'm wrong, but I think this is sort of the last stop for the decision-making process related to your recommendations, and so we have to take this pretty seriously. One question that came to mind, which I probably know the answer to, is there exists somewhere a chart where all the positions are in fact located. And any employees who are watching are probably really wondering what that chart looks like.
It's in a bunker buried 50 feet below ground.
Yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to be sure that work had been done, and these numbers represent the results of that work.
Yes.
Can you just, maybe Krista, you've probably seen this. How many steps are there in our current system, and what's the recommended changes?
I can speak a little bit to the current system. So we currently have 1 through 20 grades currently. So
1 through
20.
grades, okay.
Yep, and then within that grade structure, we have 1 through 20 steps. So once you fall on your grade, you're then placed on a step.
Okay.
Historically, we never hired anyone above a midpoint, which is a step 4, unless it came to personal bargaining for approval. But like I said, employees fell somewhere between a step 0 and a step 20. I'll let Patrick talk a little bit now about the new structure and how that kind of looks.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can see me counting my hands in terms of what letter of the alphabet. So I knew we went to grade T.
Oh, we're doing letters, okay.
Are we doing letters or numbers? I forget. Okay, we're doing numbers. That 19 grades, so you're not doing too much different. And in this particular case, it would have been an 11-step structure normally, but that's where we recommended let's break those steps above that control point, so it turns into a 16-step structure.
Slightly more compact.
A little bit more compact, but also, I think it's very competitive in terms of what you're dealing with.
And we're calling it the control point instead of the midpoint, is that it? That's CP?
You can call it whatever you want. To be
Okay.
honest, we're gonna continue to call it a control point in our information, but if you want
I like that word better.
Do you mind if I go in the weeds on one more thing? Because I think
Sure.
I think it's important for what you're dealing with here. It doesn't matter which number I use. I'm gonna go with one where I can actually see the numbers. So when you see us give you a structure that has a control point in the middle and the 87.5% and the 112.5% at min to max, those mean something to us. It's not just a matter of pulling numbers out of thin air. And I think it's important as you deal with compensation moving forward, first of all, that control point is not the market rate for any given job. It is the market estimate for that grade. Because one, you have different jobs in the same grade, and we're using that regression equation to kind of smooth that out and build a single structure. Our goal and our hope is that the market rate for an individual job is pretty darn close to that control point or midpoint. So in 95% to 105%, that sweet spot in the middle of the structure is where that market rate should exist. Then the two tail ends, they represent the 87.5% is a reasonable approximation of the 25th percentile of the marketplace. So your 25% of the organizations are paying lower than you, 75% are paying higher at that hiring rate. And that's okay, because you're gonna have some very, very low payers in the marketplace that, again, you wanna be competitive, and so you don't wanna pay all the way down. And at the top end, that represents the 75th percentile, so 25% of organizations are paying more than you. And again, you're not, you got some people out there who will, I don't care what I have to pay, just give me a body. You don't wanna compete with those. So trying to keep it narrow so that grade represents the market range for those jobs. And so it's not as precise as saying, well, here's a $25 an hour wage, because if anyone ever tells you here is the market wage for it, should be followed by here's the market wage according to this survey. That HR director, economic support, you have 72 counties, you'll have 72 different rates of pay. HR director, I might have 6 or 7 different surveys where I have HR director salaries. I'm gonna have 6 or 7 different numbers, just depending on who they're in there. So again, saying that a market rate exists at a control point is a little bit of a misnomer. And as we provide to you just an executive summary as we wind this down, we'll have an explanation of what that means. Because I think it's important from an administration standpoint that my market wage is not that control point, so therefore I should get more than. It's not intended to be. There's another point that I just had something go through my head that was a really, really good point, and it escaped it as soon as I said it. But I wanted to touch on that because I think that's important, like I said, from an administration standpoint.
I'm going to step out for just a minute, so
Okay.
take a sip. I'll be right back, okay?
I'm out.
Unless you guys want to go ahead and discussion.
We believe you.
So let's just sit here and look at each other. And
We could vote on it while he's gone.
Yeah. I make a motion. Oh, wait, that's not it.
Is that on the agenda today to make it, oh yeah, possible action. Okay, I'm ready.
So, question being new guy, and this is more for Krista and whatnot, but, you talked a fair amount about annual reviews, and you started talking about is that a part of our regular process?
No, it's not currently. We don't have actually a whole countywide performance review system. That's actually on the agenda for today to get that.
I found one, that's great.
Back up and started. But yes, pay is not tied in any way.
And I'm not saying that it has to be, but, coming from my past work experience as an employee, it can help you grow. And how do you improve if you don't
Right.
get feedback from your direct supervisor? It's good, in my opinion, it would be good for all levels of our employees, right to our directors.
We need one desperately, and I hope that we'll have one in place by February. The one that we're gonna look at today, I don't know if I'll be here for it, because I have to leave at 11:30, but it's web-based, and a lot of county agencies in Minnesota use it. That's where I
NeoGov?
found it from.
NeoGov?
No, can you remember what it is? I'd have to look it up. I sent you Risk Star or something, Star Risk? Let me look. But you don't just like pick it off the internet and start doing it. You work with the agency. Like didn't make sense for me to work with him, so I sent all of your information to him, but.
Yeah, I would say, and to go to your point, you hit on something that is oftentimes missed in these conversations, because a lot of times organizations view this as well, we need these evaluations, so when someone's bad, we have the documentation to get rid of them. And that's fine, but that's really not the intent. Talking about, allowing an employee to grow and know that we spend a lot of time in our business talking about employee engagement, how connected and committed are employees to your organization. Question one on the tool we use, the Gallup Q12, our opinion is one of the best out there. But the first question is, I know what's expected of me at work. There's two or three ways you're going to get that. First one's a good job description. I know what my core duties are, but also, good evaluation that now I know what's expected of me because I'm being told by my supervisor on a fairly regular basis. The challenge with getting these things up and running in a public sector organization is getting everyone to kind of look at this consistently. So and especially if you ever go down that pathway of tying pay and performance together, that having consistency among departments, so you don't have one department going rogue and that everybody is fantastic, even though they're not, versus everyone's terrible, even though they're not. And so it puts a lot of pressure on an HR function to kind of manage that. So talking with supervisors and training and coaching to look at this and say, you can't have, if everyone's special, then nobody's special type of thing. Well, they voted approved in your absence, so.
There was the vice chair president. Implementation. Thank you, Derek, for turning on my microphone. We have been telling department heads and employees all year, we're in the middle of a wage compensation study. We can't give you anything until somebody makes a decision. Don't come with any requests for increases, which usually happen in June. So
Right.
This would be whatever changes happen this year would happen this year, and then we would have ostensibly a stable system, predictable system that people could look at and sort of modify their expectations appropriately.
Sure.
So, as far as the county board goes, we hired you to do a job. You've done a job. You're giving us recommendations. This is basically a one-time cost adjustment, and then again predictability and being able to modify expectations. So, what do you guys think?
Well, the employee evaluation, it's called TrackStar.
Okay. I only ask the question because I'm always wondering what else is out there, so
Yeah.
thank you.
And then I looked at what can't even speak. Why can't I think of the name of the university in La Crosse? Yeah, thanks. Yes, they have also an awesome one, but I really like TrackStar, but it's not it's the group decision. But.
So your recommendation was to have an evaluation process, even though that it may not be the results of that evaluation which determine whether or not there's a step increase.
My recommendation to you would be, if you don't have an evaluation process in place, that you should really go down that path. And whether that takes you 2 months or a year to get there, because sometimes you want to be mindful of what you're asking, and sometimes starting more slowly, is get good at both. Have a good competitive wage structure, have a good, valuable, reliable evaluation system, and if you make the decision to never marry the two, that's perfectly fine. But if you do, say we want to have pay for performance, you have to have that performance evaluation system working well. And for organizations that don't, it's usually between a 2 and 4 year lead-in time to get there, because what you want to do is have the system, and maybe after 1 year, you decide, yeah, we're asking some of the wrong questions. We're not getting what we need, so you revisit it. You get supervisors accustomed to evaluating employees and kind of get in that groove and getting down to consistency. You know, the two biggest challenges in an evaluation system is, one, what does meet expectations mean? And making certain you don't have a low bar for meeting expectations. You know, I'll hear, and I'm going to exaggerate, but I'm not exaggerating by much, that I'll hear supervisors say, well, the employee showed up to work last year every day. The employee did what I asked them to. They were a good coworker, and therefore they're an outstanding employee. My response is, time out. That's exactly what's expected of them. That's the definition of meeting expectations. And so not having a low bar for meeting expectations, but then working with you, the supervisors, and the employees alike, that movement between rating levels, as long as it's meet expectations and above, is not a negative thing. And so what I mean by that is, this year I meet expectations. It's great, because it should be a relatively high bar to meet expectations, so that's a good thing. Next year, I exceed expectations. Maybe something happened, maybe it was a new software implementation, or we had a lot of turnover and I just stepped outside my role and I contributed, or whatever those facts might be, so I exceeded expectations. The following year, I don't have those opportunities, so I'm meeting expectations again. In most people's eyes, that's viewed as a negative event. What do you mean you went from outstanding to meeting? We need to have a talk. And the response should be no. Again, our bar is high for meeting. That not every employee has the opportunity to knock it out of the park every single year. So that notion of that once a rock star, always a rock star, it just doesn't work that way. And so there's a level of maturity and experience that needs to come with an evaluation system to truly manage performance from a pay standpoint. Because if you go into it with the mentality that, well, I'm an outstanding employee, therefore I need to always be an outstanding employee, you're going to go broke and you're not going to be able to truly devise a performance-based budget that's not going to break the bank. That you're going to be paying at that top level, or those top level people, based on your pool of money you have available, are going to get very, very meager increases. It's not going to have anything to do with motivating or encouraging performance. So that's why there's some of that work involved with trying to get where you need to be in terms of moving to a performance-based pay structure.
Yeah, while you were out, we just talked about, it's on the agenda, employee evaluations.
Oh,
We
okay.
weren't necessarily saying we were going to move to a pay for performance model. We just there's a serious need to begin to do employee reviews ASAP.
Right, for any number of reasons, not the least of which is, so we have justification
Right.
for,
Yeah, for employees to have feedback. Everybody deserves to know how they're doing,
right.
so. We just have been waiting for way too long to bring, because we had such a terrible one years ago. It was like, but life got in the way of trying to figure that out.
The $413,000 number, which may not in fact be $413,000 because we already have $200,000 plus budgeted, represents a one-time placement of jobs on a new pay scale, period. We're just going to take everything, put it up there. You'll get at least a 2% raise. If you don't agree with this, there is an appeals process, and then that's the budget for this year. So there'll be no step increases, no cost of living adjustments, nothing like that, other than, there he goes, other than the what increases there might be for Social Security, Medicare, retirement, stuff like that. Am I characterizing that pretty well?
So I think you got it.
Okay. Well, committee, what do you think?
Yes,
Okay, this isn't a vote yet, but,
I know, I know.
Let's have a
You asked
motion.
me what I thought, and I
Yeah,
said
okay, yes,
yes, I
okay.
agree.
I agree.
I do too.
all right.
So should we have a motion?
We should probably have a motion. I feel a consensus, but yeah, let's have a motion.
Go ahead, Judy.
I'm trying to figure out how to put it in
That's
words.
what I'm trying to figure out too.
So help me here, let's work together, Kellen.
Motion
To accept the recommendation number 3, is that what it is? Step that
Can't even
provides
read
at
it,
least
so.
2% increase that is recommended by Carlson and Detman
with an average wage increase.
with an average wage increase is at 3.5%. Got that? Who's ever taking notes?
All right, is there a
I'll
second?
second that.
All right, Jeannie did the motion.
I second it.
Ron does the second. Any other discussion?
I
Okay.
like when we're decisive.
I do have a question.
Go ahead.
So for next steps, if this motion does get approved, we already discussed it needs to go to exec finance. So their next-
We discussed that, but what was your impression of our discussion? Was it our discussion you were talking about? Or the discussion here today, or the discussion with,
The discussion we've had here
Okay,
today, that
yeah.
that would be the next steps, the appropriate next step, to go to exec finance.
Yeah,
well,
right? No.
yes and no,
Okay.
because I'm reading into what you're saying. When someone says it goes to exec finance, it usually means they have to approve this.
No, we approve it.
We approve this.
Okay.
What goes to exec finance is the number, and they work that into the budget
Yeah.
process, which is starting on, but in much the same way as the insurance increases.
Okay.
Which is starting on the 29th or 30th of September. So that's what we mean by going to exec finance. All right, okay.
You're talking next steps, so can I interject something that before we get to the county board level, there's 2 things that you need to see. One, that document that's buried in that underground bunker.
Okay, yes.
I would not expect anyone to approve the final without seeing that. I mean, that first thing has to pass a smell test. And the second thing would be an executive summary that if you want us to come to the county board meeting, it's an if, and it's your choice. One, if I were to present, it would be a shorter presentation than this. You're welcome. But the second part is that with that executive summary would explain a lot of the detail that we talked about today in terms of the intent of the pay structure and those sorts of things. But, so I wouldn't expect you to adopt without those 2 pieces of information in hand.
It's kind of important that we make a decision to accept this today
well,
because budget starts
Absolutely.
on the 29th.
Yep.
I mean, unless you, and the county board meeting is the 20th, you could still get on the agenda. I mean, it would be fast, it's,
Of this month?
yeah,
Next Monday.
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm
So,
not-
but
I'm not
we have
around,
to,
so.
this process has to move along a little, I don't want to wait till October to make it would be October before we would make a decision. We need to decide today about,
Yes.
okay.
And I think what you were doing with your landing metaphor
Yep.
was to describe the process that got you to this.
Yep. Yeah.
And I think by us agreeing to this, we would be basically approving or appreciating your process, appreciating that we understand that this number is not something you pulled out of the air.
If I take that analogy one step further, you're the signal teller that gave us approval to land.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly. Thank you. We'll keep our allegory metaphor alive one
I
more,
like
for
that.
one more time. We have a motion and a second to approve the third option in our costing recommendations for the step that provides at least a 2% increase. All in favor, say aye.
Can I just say,
What?
I just want to say something. The reason that I love this whole process is because we're always thinking about, what's out there, what's impacting our employees, and and I love getting rid of that midpoint. That's such a weird, Anyway, I really like this. I have listened intently for an hour and a half, so
Okay, that's good.
I really appreciate it.
And I know this takes a lot of time, but you
No,
only
but
do
it's
only
important.
do this every
It has to.
10, 15 years.
It
so
has
Because
to.
we're paying attention to what's it's relevant.
Yep.
What we're deciding today really is looking at how the last 2 years have impacted our employees. And actually, since I've been on the county board, we are always fighting with people coming here, getting training, and going someplace else where the pay is higher. So I really appreciate looking at the market.
Oh, I know what my thought was.
Oh, good.
Well, good.
You just said something, you said thank you.
You're welcome.
That when we talk about building a pay structure, two points with this. Building a pay structure on the 50th percentile of the market, you need to understand what that means. And,
Mm-hmm.
and there's nothing wrong with it. 90% give or take, of organizations build their structures around that, is that half of the organizations are going to pay less than you. So you always have, and also, but half of the organizations are going to pay more than you. So but as a committee, as HR, as department heads, the only conversation that you ever hear about is who's paying more.
Right.
And so I think that's an important distinction to understand as you're adopting this, is that it's still based on that there are going to be organizations who pay more than you, and because of that comparable pool, that makes perfect sense. And I guess, the half paying more, half paying less, it just it comes back so often of, I saw this job in the newspaper, it's paying more. And that's also why having that structure, the full range, gives you that cushion. That if, by having employees, eventually get to that point where they're at the 75th percentile of the marketplace, you're paying competitively through that meaty part of the market. And, that even though I would hope that you don't have to go through a full study any more frequently than 10, 15 years, I mean, that's the goal.
Well, we were told originally 5 to 8, but
Well-
we'll do it more often than we've done.
And but the way our approach works is that the full study every 10, 15 years, and depending on what's done, but then every 3 to 5, depending on what's going in the marketplace, going back and revisiting where do we stand in the market, not where do all the positions land, but where do we stand in the marketplace, and just kind of test that from time to time, helps keep you on track. And again, usually the best indication is, well, are we that we implemented this, we adopted it. The sad part of this wage process is it doesn't magically make bodies appear where bodies don't exist.
Right.
That you're still going to have hiring difficulties, because everybody under the sun is going to have hiring difficulties for at least the next decade, but at least it puts you in a position where you can compete a little bit more than where you were before.
It isn't, and I'm piggybacking on what Jeannie said, how much I've enjoyed this presentation, because not only do we appear decisive now, or are being decisive,
Shocking.
but it also, I love the analysis. I love thinking about why we're thinking about something.
That's
And
that's
looking
my
at,
life.
looking at what else is out there, not only in terms of other consulting firms, but the overall societal and economic trends that are going on, trends and challenges. And we're taking that into consideration by accepting the results of your work.
Agreed.
And if the compensation study doesn't happen every 10 years, it isn't just every 3 years we're looking at where we stand in the marketplace, but rather what are the trends that are going on, what's affecting us, how can we address this, who are we, basically,
Right.
in relationship to the rest of the world. I was impressed with, and I have seen, I think it must be your reports that come out pretty regularly, how the private sector and the public sector are moving apart in terms of wage increases. That's significant. We need to discuss that in terms of why is it that someone would want to work in the public sector, identify that, and then build that into our recruitment.
I'll give you a free piece of advice.
Oh, boy, free
It's not,
advice.
well, and it's not very, that when you look at the data and the information about the newer generations coming into the workplace, the millennials, Generation Z, a lot of things that they talk about are meaning. What's the meaning and purpose of the work I'm doing? In the public sector, especially at county government, in my opinion, you've got that so far ahead of others that you're asking people to do very difficult things, whether it's in your human services agencies or departments or divisions, public health, law enforcement. They're doing
Conservation.
things with meaning and purpose. And so if just being able to market yourselves and identify and articulate, here's how we're helping and impacting our community in a positive way, that helps you so much in, I would, maybe not necessarily pure recruitment, but I think an understanding and appreciation of the public sector, because I think the biggest thing is trying to bring those newer generations into the public sector, where they don't necessarily see the value. They hear a lot of bad stuff in the news, because that's usually what sells the newspapers, but my experience in working with and for the public sector over the course of the last 27 years is kind of, I think it was Tip O'Neill, could have been someone else, that, all government is local, and that's where things get done, and the real meaningful things that impact people on a daily basis. And so I think from a recruitment standpoint is market the meaning and purpose that these jobs have, I think can help you a great deal.
Yeah, and for those same generations, it's not always money. It's like
Purpose.
Where we live, Trempealeau County is a wonderful place to live. We have lots to do here. We were the only county in the state that lost the least amount of money during the last 18 months. Our benefits are good. There's a lot of other things that entice people to employment besides pay.
Did
you get that meaning and purpose down? Good.
There was a study that was done a couple years ago, and I forget by whom, but their final analysis was it was either 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 employees would take less money. Not a ton less, let's make sure we frame that appropriately,
Right.
but they would take less money to work at a job with meaning and purpose. And so I think, again, that's something that, to the extent that you can do that, because I don't think anyone's ever going to get rich working in the public sector.
No.
But rich money is only part of,
Right.
that richness. It's am I doing something that fulfills me and helps me contribute to society is becoming more and more important.
And that's the other reason I loved how you did this wage study, is because you paid attention to people and the people that work here. And I didn't feel that from the last wage study, that you really focus on who we are. So I appreciate
I
that.
hope that holds true all the way through. I mean, that's our goal,
Yeah.
and we try to get that way and get that far.
We're waiting for Kellen, but in terms of the appeal process, are you available for that?
That's what we would conduct that.
You conduct that as well, okay. And is there a timeline for that, within 6 months, within a year?
No, let's be very clear that our goal would be to have this done before so it's usually, and maybe take a quick breath after the adoption, but it's usually a 2-week window. You can play with those numbers, a 2-week window after adoption to request the information. And then maybe you have the information for 2 weeks, and within that 2 weeks, then you have to decide if you want to appeal or not. And then within a 2 to 4 weeks, just depending on everyone's availability, getting that analysis done and recommendations back. So again, by the time you're doing payroll changes for next year, you've got that done, so you're not waiting 6 months or things that. I don't want us or you to lose sight of the process, and waiting that long would.
Okay. So, we have a motion and a second to approve this third option. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, it is approved. My understanding is that there'll be a release of the step and the new wage structure. Why are you looking at me like that?
No, I would say in advance of the board.
Okay, so we really do want to make this presentation to the county board,
A version.
a version of it.
I don't think you want me going as long as I did today unless you think it's
There's no vote or anything by the
necessary.
county board, correct?
Pardon?
We're the beginning and the end, it's not a, okay.
In terms of the approval, right.
Right.
So,
Okay.
all right, we'll make that, we'll use this, we'll talk about this.
Both next steps are gonna look like,
In terms of,
in terms of releasing the structure, like, what's the appropriate way to do that?
Okay, you've had this experience before. What do other county boards do?
that's why I paused, because it's all over the place.
Yeah.
And part of the challenge is, it's not a matter of keeping things secret. I mean, there's a little bit of that, but it's more staging the decisions appropriately so you don't go 12 different directions at the same time. And so in advance of the board meeting, the answer is, at what point do the employees receive the information? I have heartburn, personally, based on my experiences, of releasing too much information to the employees without the board's knowledge first. It starts as a policy decision, and there's not much more policy than establishing, the wage structure for an organization. So to say, hey, let's roll this out to all of the employees first, it's difficult. And so that's why, in terms of like even today, let's make certain that we have a firm grip on process before we get too deep into the conversation about, what the final results look like. So leading into the board, you can't go to the board without the structure. But I would say that probably should be released, as the packets are being sent out. I would fully expect, that some will, engage in the phone tree that would exist. I mean, that's, you talk about all the benefits and the beauty of the public sector. One of the pitfalls is
Openness,
the openness and the accessibility. Now, I'll take the openness and accessibility any day of the week, so I'm not trying to downgrade that, but that I think, again, engaging at the employee level, that's why we have the appeals process. That if there's somebody who wholeheartedly disagrees with what's being recommended, instead of upending the apple cart or whatever, however you want to describe it, prior to the board adoption, that we got this process. If that's exactly how you want to go on that way, we'll deal with any concerns or misgivings about your individual placement through the appeals process. And so my recommendation would be for us to get that executive summary put together, which it'll be anywhere between 4 and 8 pages. It's not going to be, our feeling is giving you a 50-page document is something that 5 years later you blow the dust off of when you look at it again. That let's get to the heart of the matter and get you the key recommendations, which would include the wage schedule, but it would be sent out as part of the county board packet in prior to that meeting and not necessarily a month or 2-3 weeks in advance. I think having that information so it feeds the conversation. I want to add to the process itself, and here's where the counties differ, and I'll leave it to you. Option A, I'll give you option A and option B. Option A would be for me to send the information out in advance, come here to present and ask for a decision that night. I found that to be a little bit problematic, but I think with enough lead-in, you can accomplish that. My preference would be to present at one meeting as a workshop, and whether or not I show up for the second meeting is up to you. That oftentimes it's a matter of, let's get you comfortable, kind of like today. Let's get you comfortable with the thought process. You'd have more detail at that time to even contemplate greater, and then come back at the subsequent meeting for the approval once they've had a chance to ask questions or think about it. It just, sometimes I think supervisors get a little bit afraid of making a decision when here's a ton of information you're putting in front of us, now decide. Where to simply say, here's a ton of information, think about it for a couple of weeks and let's come back and make that decision. It just makes for a better landing of the airplane.
I'm still struggling with where the responsibility lies for approval. We are recommending to the exec finance a $413,000, probably less, closer to half of that increase based on increases from previous years, to the exec finance committee to work into their budget, their budget considerations, which we will do. I'm saying we as an exec finance committee member now.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, and I'm waiting for Rick. Rick has stopped typing, so he's starting to pay attention. On top of that, it sounds like there is at least a recommendation, if not a requirement, that the county board approve the wage scale. The actual makeup of the wage scale and the placement of the employees on, not the employees, the job descriptions on that wage scale. Based on your scenario, that would mean an October presentation to the county board with no action, potentially, and then at the public, literally at the budget meeting in November and the public hearing that precedes that, or is within that meeting in November, we would make the decision, and then going forward, it all just, we approve the budget based on our pay scale, on the new pay scale after the approval of the pay scale, or we spend 2 days arguing about it, which is not unusual. There was one year we actually went 3 days, So this is when all the hard work gets done. Does this sound, am I creating a crazy scenario, or is this sounding like a way we're gonna go?
Sounds very, very. Should I get my?
Yeah,
I'll go over here.
okay.
That is a likely scenario, or a version of it anyhow. Part of the issue is going to be timing. As you know, the exec finance recommends to the board well in advance what the budget should be. And so if you don't make a decision until the October meeting that goes into November, then you're looking at a situation where the exec finance isn't able to make that recommendation necessarily, because they'll already be done with their putting together of the budget, so to speak.
Well, and that's always the case when we go into the budget, is there's a public hearing. If the board has the ability to change a whole lot of things at that board meeting. The action we just took was to recommend this number to, and the results of this study to the exec finance to consider within our budget deliberations.
Correct. So basically, you're asking the exec finance to give its approval or not, and then they can, if they choose not to, then they would go with the traditional. Is that kind of what you're?
No, what I'm saying is, these are the numbers, work them into your budget considerations. We believe that it's the responsibility of the Personnel Bargaining Committee to make this decision without any other layers. What it is, which is why I'm confused, or not confused, but why I understand there's some hesitation on Krista's part to just go forward with this. But we have no choice at this point. We need a number to work with. We can't expect you to come back to the Exec Finance Committee in two weeks and do this all over again, and then have them make a different decision than we are. Someone has to be, as you said, decisive.
The buck stops with this committee,
Right.
in my opinion, based on previous wage consideration.
And that's, I mean, if this were a year without a wage compensation study, the Personnel Bargaining Committee would recommend step increases and a cost of living increase, and that's the numbers that the Exec Finance Committee would start with. So we see no difference in this than that. But if it's important, or if it's part of basically what our contract with you was, is that the county board will approve the step structure. I totally understand that.
I think the only variable, and I think either you have the tools or we can get you the tools relatively quickly, is, so say, for example, you or the exec finance dig into it and say, we really want to do that third option, but we can only make 1.75 or 1.5% as that number work. That's a pretty easy turnaround time to get that number as an option. This was just kind of based on how the market is moving now in terms of the 2% and trying to do something. So there's some customizability with these options, but you know the parameters. Those first two numbers are the bookends, and so everything else is moving up from that first number. So from 239 to 413, it might be 389 or some fake, whatever number that might be. So you still have some customizability that doesn't require us to show up and say, here's a new way of doing it. Like I said, it's a pretty easy number to calculate, if necessary. We think this is the fairest way, but again, if you need a different approach because of your limitations, we can help with that.
No, I'm getting it, but I have, I've sat in on exec finance for a number of years now, and we always manage. So, I'm sure Krista doesn't have this at her fingertips, but it'd be cool if you did. How much of an increase in wages happened last year, total cost? Well, the number you have this year is like $230-some thousand. So we had to find last year we had to find $230,000 or $250,000, and we did. So my guess is that we can do that this year as well.
Krista, has that look on her face?
I guess my only question is process-wise, I guess. George, from what I'm understanding, you're thinking it doesn't need to go to full county board? Because that's what we've done in years past. They approved it throughout the budgeting process,
Right.
correct?
Correct.
Okay, so is that the same feel we're getting for this process?
Well, yeah, the county board always in November approves the whole budget. And it can be, like we had, a couple of years ago, we had to negotiate the library because we
Right.
bumped it up to 100%. That happened at the November meeting. I think today we're approving what you spent the last 5 months doing, and we're saying we like it and we appreciate it and we want to implement it, and our committee makes that decision. And then, I understand how it needs to be presented to the county board, but in my mind, we're just telling them how you did it and how we got to this point. Not saying,
Approve it.
here's the stamp of approval. Somebody has to make this decision, and I see it's our committee. And if there's anybody out there watching this, from the exec finance or John Austin, they could call in and say, Gene, you're nuts, so.
Well, and actually, I was just gonna make that point that you were just making, that in terms of the county board, just based on time alone, that a third of the time, that I spent today talking about this, and it's not that this is a recorded presentation. I would invite any county board member, any citizen who has a question. This is probably a good starting point,
Right.
as opposed to having to regurgitate everything all over again.
Oh, yeah, and it'll be rerun on our TV station, so, replayed.
Yeah.
I think we're doing the right thing. I think you're right. This is the committee that is charged with making these
So
decisions.
at this point, because Krista is still hesitant, maybe Rick could call up the county board rules and read the responsibilities of the Personnel Bargaining Committee.
Are you doing that right now?
I am.
Oh, God, you're such a genius. That's why we hired you.
The one that refers to compensation says administer the non-union classification and compensation plan.
So you are right. That's our charge. Just like we do with union contracts. We don't send those off to
have somebody else.
have somebody else approve them.
Well, actually,
That's
we
why
do.
we're here.
The unit contract does go to the board for approval.
Right,
Yeah.
that's true. But we
That's a bad
approve-
example.
They're just but we find.
Edit that out, Derek.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, then I'm comfortable.
Okay, good. Be
And-
comfortable, please.
And I'm going to say, and this is just going to muddy the waters, the only thing that I have hesitation about is because it's a brand-new structure with brand-new, putting everybody in a different place. That's the only hesitation I have when it comes to, because it's going to result in a lot more money. Is that something that the board needs to be involved in? It doesn't say it specifically, that's just my only hesitation. So if someone asks, that's the only reason why I hesitate a little bit. But other than that, yeah, that this committee is tasked with the job of making.
And you're not done here today. There'll be department heads that'll need to understand this and know why we came to this point. I can't imagine anybody being mad about this. Really? Well, there might be a couple, but you have to educate the whole department on why we landed in this, why you landed the plane on this lane.
It took me a few years to realize this myself in this business,
Mm-hmm.
that, again, the ability to make everybody happy.
Yeah, it won't happen.
Somebody upset. I wish it wasn't that,
Right.
but there's not much more personal than pay.
Right.
And so, that's why, I'm a little bit more pragmatic about it in my old age than maybe when I was in my younger years.
Yeah, so,
Let's, Rick, to assuage your hesitancy and to make Christie even more comfortable with this, can we follow your suggestions? Send a copy of the,
PowerPoint?
no, the wage structure
Oh.
in the packets in October and have you present. The county board can decide then or wait until November to give its stamp of approval.
I think that's fair.
I think that's fair too, as opposed to Krista and Nikki printing them all off and sending them to all employees right after this meeting. We'll wait until October. By then, the budget process will have pretty much wrapped up, and we'll be looking at the budget and so forth, so the county will perhaps have something to talk about.
And the meeting is, October 18th,
Yes.
7 o'clock.
So about a
In this
month
room.
from now. If that's okay. Okay. All right, let's do that. This was awesome.
It was awesome.
I really appreciate the depth that you've gone into, and also the amount of information that you were able to condense and get to us.
It's painful listening to it. I mean.
No, it's
But at
not.
the same
For
No, it
me,
wasn't
I-
painful at all, no. I was
Yeah.
not in pain ever,
A little bit.
yeah.
Ron was
Yeah, because I
really
have to go to
over
the
here.
dentist, so that's weighing on my brain.
Okay, we'll move on. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, thank you. And thank you, whose name I forgot.
I will be here for the employee, but you have the information on TrackStar, right? I emailed it to you.
Yep.
Thanks.
And we can look at other options.
Yeah.
But you can't really see TrackStar and what it looks like until you meet
Right,
with the
meet
guy
with them.
and go through it.
Yep.
All right, so we're going to move to number 6, open enrollment to include group health insurance and voluntary benefits. And yay, in the last 3 days, whoever it is that's responsible for getting these numbers to you finally got them to you.
Yes.
Is it bad?
Yeah.
Hesitation says maybe.
Yes.
So
All
we
right.
don't have the state plan available anymore, right? And didn't you say that courts was splitting into 2?
Yes, so we have, as you'll see, there's 2 different options we're presenting right now. There's option 1 and option 2. So the 3 networks that I have on here are going to be networks that have providers within Trempealeau County. So we have
Right.
doctors on site within Trempealeau County. There are, I want to say, 15 other networks that employees can choose from. Some of those might be based out of La Crosse or Eau Claire or Milwaukee or Madison, whatever the choice may be. So employees can still choose those. They still have the option. I just have the top 3 listed that have providers within Trempealeau County. That's what you're seeing here. So those are
Okay.
going to be Health Partners Health Plan, Quartz West, and WEA Trust West Mayo Clinic. So state maintenance plan is still available to employees. However,
Oh, it is? Oh,
there are no providers even close to this area. I want to
Yeah.
say they're all up towards like Russ County, that area. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for employees to stay on state maintenance plan unless, of course, that's where their healthcare provider is located.
okay.
Okay? Yeah, it's, I don't know why.
Like not even in Eau Claire or La Crosse, it's all the way to Russ County.
Yep. But there's other, like I said, Health Partners Health Plan, they have providers in La Crosse and Eau Claire. Quartz West is going to be, again, Gunderson-based system. WEA Trust is going to be the Mayo Clinic-based system. Last year, we've seen a lot of employees go to Dean Health, Prevea 360. That's going to be like Sacred Heart out of Eau Claire. So there's still affordable options for employees. They don't have to stay with Quartz. However, that kind of leads me into my next talking point, is Quartz is going to be our most affordable plan option for employees this year. Again, for anyone listening, that's all set by the state. That's not set by us here. I didn't magically choose that plan. That's all negotiations that are done at the state level. So going into options, what I have available for you here today. So the tan colored box on the top is going to be what employees are currently paying. So 2021 costs, the top box is going to be health insurance with dental for full-time employees, and the bottom box there is going to be health insurance without dental. The dental plan that's kind of lumped into our health plan is going to be a preventative-based plan. There are options for additional dental if employees are wanting to choose those. So last year, the county decided to pay for 88% of that dental plan as well as 88% of the health insurance plan. That was the first year we've done that, paying for the dental. Previously, dental was a separate plan. The state never offered it. But the last 2 years, we have gone with the state dental plan, which is quite a bit more affordable than what we had in previous years. So jumping into the plan options, again, option 1 would be the county paying 88% of the tier 1 plan, which is, again, like I said, is Quartz. And again, to pay towards that preventative dental plan, so paying 88% of health insurance and paying 88% of the preventative dental plans. So you'll see those numbers listed there for option 1. To adopt this plan, it would result in approximately a 10% increase to the employer. So that's quite a bit. So about 300,000 give or take for 2022, which would be in addition, so about 25,000 more a month for our health insurance bill. That's not including for the healthcare center or the highway department. That's just strictly courthouse.
Now I see why you were so hesitant. You knew something we didn't.
This would also be a 10% increase to employees. What I based my number off of for that was from an employee going from the state maintenance plan last year to the courts plan this year. Only reason I chose those numbers was because the state maintenance plan was the lowest cost plan last year. This year it's going to be courts. So that's not necessarily for all employees. Not all employees are going to be tacking on a 10% increase to their health insurance. I'll use myself for example. I'm currently on the courts plan. I'm going to be seeing a significant decrease to my plan if I stay with courts.
I see that.
So it all depends on which plan that employees are on. That 10% number is just based, like I said, on lowest cost plan to lowest cost plan. So that's option 1. Option 2 would be county paying, again, 88% of the health insurance, but not including that dental. We would ask employees to pay that full dental premium cost. Those numbers for a single plan, a dental plan is going to be $30.20 a month. A family plan is going to be $75.50 a month. So the blue box does not have dental built into the number. The with dental plan, it's tacked onto the total premium, not the employer cost. If we adopted this plan, it would be approximately a 6% increase to the employer, so about $180,000 more per year or $15,000 a month. You're going to see here this number is quite large, the 38% increase to the employee. I know that seems very large, but again, that's taking into account the employees taking on 100% of their dental premium. We can, of course, there's more options that we could work with. I just based these two off of the 88%, which is what historically Trempealeau County has paid towards the health insurance.
So, okay. Well, there you actually have those numbers on here, okay.
Courts is, just so I get clarification, that's part of Gunderson,
Correct.
which is like right here in Whitehall, and Mayo's and Osseo.
Well, Arcadia.
Oh, Arcadia,
Yeah,
okay.
and do they have a clinic in Galesville? I don't think, they had one, but they bailed out and then Gunderson came in.
Quartz sends you a thank you card after you've had a visit with them. Isn't that sweet?
But you're still paying, I mean, so
I know,
it's probably
I know.
part of the.
Well, maybe they
the
just do it for
premium is-
Medicare people.
Budgeted for it.
They budgeted for it, yeah.
Yeah, that's what the increase is. They had to buy thank you cards.
Yes.
I thought it was nice, though. My husband got a thank you card yesterday from all the staff.
Okay, so the options are, does the county pay dental or not? And last year was the first year we paid dental.
A portion.
A portion of it.
88%.
But the reason it was something we even considered was because the state is now offering a dental plan, which was considerably less than just the employees paying dental. So, and that exists now. This is part of the state plan.
Yep.
It includes the dental, okay. So it's a difference between a 6% increase and a 10% increase to the county.
What's happening?
$180,000 to $300,000.
Oh, fire truck.
What was, we actually had a decrease last year, didn't we?
We did. Yep, both the employee and employer took on
Yeah.
a decrease.
And
last year.
that at least in part was because of the existence of the state plan as a Tier 1 plan.
Correct.
Interesting thing about brains is they can really only make one big decision a day. And we've got, so now we've got our second one on the docket here.
Both the green and the blue are 88%.
Correct.
The blue does not include dental.
Right.
So if we didn't pay for dental, that would erase the increase that we just gave employees for salary.
They would be, right, just responsible if they're wanting that preventative dental plan to pay for it.
So how much, I'm trying to parse out what it is. So oh man, because I'm not seeing a big difference in the numbers between the green plan and the blue plan.
No, they're not.
Um,
They're almost the same.
Yeah,
The biggest difference, if you look at, for example, look at Courts West, a family plan with dental is gonna cost the employee $250, $650. In the green box, if you look down, if they're wanting that same plan with dental, it's gonna cost them $320, $294.
okay. Well, the reason the without dental are exactly the same is because it's without dental.
Right.
Okay, now I get it. That's,
Yep.
we should just be looking at the differences in the top lines in the green
Right.
and the blue.
Right.
Okay, got that.
Although there is a decrease for quartz, right?
Yes, Courts has if my memory's serving me correctly, it's about a 50% decrease
Yeah. With dental.
with dental.
Do a lot of employees utilize quartz?
Last year, we seen a lot of people switch and come off and go onto the state maintenance plan or the Dean Health Prevea 360. The year before that, a lot of people were with Courts because the Mayo Clinic plan was not at all affordable.
Right.
So,
Crazy.
yeah.
Well, and now the state plan is not accessible unless you want to drive to Ladysmith.
But they do have other options, you know, if they wanted to go with the Mayo Clinic plan, they could. If they wanted to go to Dean Health Prevea because they lived in the Strum Osseo area, they could doctor in Eau Claire. So there are options.
Well, okay, that actually raises the other issue. These are estimates.
No, these are the
exact
deal.
numbers.
These are exact numbers. Okay,
There are just more plans that they can choose from. So once we decide what our employer contributions are,
okay.
we'll
Oh,
apply those numbers.
That clarifies it, yes,
Yep.
okay, to whatever plan they choose.
Yep,
Okay.
so for example, let me pull up, I know I keep talking about Dean Health Prevea. So if we look at that number, their total premium cost for a family plan is $1,974. So the Courts plan total is $2,137. So if an employee is wanting to stick with Dean Health Prevea 360, they're gonna have a pretty low premium. If we contribute, the green box, the $1,881 is the employer.
Okay. So what we're doing basically is approving either the 764.84 or the 738.27.
Correct.
Okay. Phew. Now I'm certain.
It's like either with or without dental.
Basically.
I have to leave, but I would support with dental, in case anybody wants my humble opinion.
Do you really have to leave? I'd like you here for the disciplinary action policy.
Well, to change a dental appointment means I don't get in until like a year from now.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. I didn't know we would be here so long.
I kind of figured we would. Committee? Just, I'll entertain a motion. Jeannie, why don't you make yours a motion and see where it goes?
I would approve I'd put it all away. Which one is it? Option 1 with dental.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Kellen. Any other discussion? All in favor of approving option 1 with dental, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Jeannie, did you?
I'm not opposing it. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, all right. None opposed, it passes.
Oppose my
Let's
own
put that into the
motion.
numbers that gets to
When is the discipline?
exec finance too. We're gonna, this is gonna be great.
I do have just a quick update in regards to open enrollment.
Okay, good.
So as of right now, we're monitoring the COVID situation very closely. We're hoping to still bring on site the insurance center to do open enrollment meetings in person with all staff. We're planning to take some precautionary measures. You know, masks will be available. We'll be wiping down after each person, hopefully working with maintenance to put up plexiglass between the insurance center and the employee. That's my hope, is to have that in person again this year, but we will see what happens, who knows, within the next 2 weeks. So that's really all I have on that. We do not have any increases for our voluntary benefits, so that's a great thing as
Okay.
well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I move to the disciplinary action policy? I know we sent this back. Okay. I've read it a number of times since the last month. My concerns have been alleviated, but although I do have a couple of questions. It's not a secret that Jeannie and I were against county administrator, and what's that?
We've changed our minds.
We've changed our minds on that, and we'll probably, if we get an opportunity, we will most likely bring that back to the county board. What I see this as, in as much as the county administrator's position would be responsible for disciplinary actions related to department heads, I see this as a bridge policy, potentially, and a good one at that, because it has 3 county board supervisors with Rick and Krista in advising roles, and if there were a county administrator, they would still be advising the county administrator in much the same way. But in this case, we have 3 other persons at the table representing the committee, Personnel Bargaining Committee, and the chairman of the board. I do have one question, so I'm supporting this, except with the exception, not the exception, but with the question about the what it is the last sentence means. The department head shall have access to the county's employment policies. All department heads have that already.
It's online,
Yeah, exactly. So,
or it's on the shared drive, right?
but it replaces a sentence which says, the department head shall adhere to the decision of the group and shall have access to the county's grievance policies. So it basically is stating that they can go and look at the policies, but does not outline any opportunity for a grievance or an appeal, or for that matter, there's nothing that says the department head would have access to the information, all of the information on which the decision was made. And I think that has been a criticism of our previous issues, is I didn't know what you were looking at, I didn't have access to what it is you're basing your decision on. So I guess, Rick, I'm just looking for a clarification on what that last sentence actually is supposed to be meaning.
And after you said it that way, I can see the different interpretation. The intent of it is that if a department head is disciplined for any reason, they still have access. When I say access, they can still file a grievance, they can still make a claim of some other violation of policy that took place during the investigation process, all those things. Because there's a different process for department heads, it doesn't mean that they lose their rights under whatever employment policies that are currently in effect. That's what the intent was. Maybe the wording isn't the best on that now. And the reason I took out grievance and put in employment was it may be something other than just a grievance. It might be, my rights were violated when this, I was harassed by the investigator, or I was, whatever the case might be.
Okay.
So that way they would have access to all those. So we certainly could try and tweak some of that language to make it a little bit more clear. You had a second question?
Do you want to use an appeal, the word appeal process? Or the word we use in the county government is grievance, right?
Typically, yes. The grievance would be as appealing the decision that was made. Maybe we could say grievance and employment policies,
Okay.
just so that way there's some clarification. And yeah, they have access and they can visually read it. This was more so that they can file whatever they feel is appropriate under any of the policies. And again, too.
That's where the language actually seemed to shift from one to the other.
Sure. And the other thing you said, too, about access to the information, that is largely going to be dependent on the circumstances, because as you know, a number of things come into play. It might be attorney-client privilege or work product privilege. During investigations, of course, by statute, those things are confidential, so there might be a number of confidentiality procedures. I don't say policies because some are state statute that come into play when it comes to what can the person review, and it would be subject to those policies and statutes that would allow the access. Does that help with where I'm going with?
I mean,
Okay.
that's sort of covered up. There's a lot of language about that.
And when, I'm sorry.
Last part, we just say grievance and/or employment
Correct, yep.
policies?
I'll leave the grievance in there and then put and/or employment policies. I'll leave the adhere out, and the only reason I took that out, because I'm like, well, they have to follow the action anyhow, and they can go through the grievance process if they
Right.
don't like it, so that's the thing.
That made sense.
Mhm.
Jeannie?
And the issue with, the county board made decisions about reports are going to be client, what's the other word, client?
Attorney-client privilege.
Attorney-client privilege, as I'm looking at an attorney, I can't think of the word. I mean, the county board made those decisions, right? We're going to keep these records confidential.
They did, I mean, by law, they are.
Right.
And then if someone requests it, they have to assert the privilege.
all right.
So, yep.
That's asserting the privilege.
Okay,
Whatever.
I
Correct.
got it.
Yep.
So there's a lot of processes to go through to be able to access the report, or, and I think if the report is about you and then it gets access, then it becomes public record,
It
and then
loses-
it's in the paper, and then it's
loses the
wherever.
privilege.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so you lose. I mean, it's a double-edged sword,
Sure.
so.
So I see we all have copies. Is there a motion to approve the amended disciplinary action policy?
Before you do that, there was a request that it go to the department heads for them to review before official approval. So, and it's up to this committee, I mean, it's up to you whether you want to do it before or after you approve it, so.
I think we can approve it and then they can review it.
Okay, and that's fine, I just wanted to bring it up that it was requested, so, but this committee can do whatever you choose to do.
Because we've been
so.
kind of sitting on this for several months. We
Yeah,
need to have
yeah.
something in place.
And move forward.
Yeah, we need to move forward.
Okay, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Is there a second? Okay, Nelson and Johnson, any other discussion? All in favor of approving the change in disciplinary action policy related to department heads, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. Jeannie, thanks for sticking around.
Yeah.
Good luck with your teeth. Employment performance review policy process. I guess you guys, we've talked about this a little bit today. Is there anything more you want to touch on? Do you have something prepared?
No, I think it's just basically an update. So last August, this board had approved the creation of a performance review work group to consist of HR, a few department heads, staff members, and then one member of the personal bargaining committee. Jeannie and I had briefly talked about placing it on the agenda for this meeting. I did just let Jeannie know with the compensation study and open enrollment, I'm not sure we'll have a whole lot of time within the next few months to work on getting this group started, but my hope is to get a group started for January 2022.
You can put me on this is for an employee evaluation. Yeah.
Yes.
You can put me on that group.
Okay,
Okay.
so I just wanted to
let-
update you on that, and don't think
She's
I'm
still
ignoring
there.
it, but
All right, let's do that. Okay, the Professional Policemen's Association contract?
yes, so I do have the contract, or the resolution. This did go to exec finance already, so we're just needing signatures from this group.
Why
and it
don't you
is-
read this and we'll make it official?
All right. So whereas a tentative labor agreement has been reached between Wisconsin Professional Police Association, WPPA, representing detectives and deputies in the Trempealeau County Sheriff's Office and the Trempealeau County Personnel Bargaining Committee for the period of January 1st, 2022 to December 31st, 2024. And whereas the tentative agreement has been endorsed by members of the Employee Bargaining Union and by the Personnel Bargaining Committee of Trempealeau County. And whereas a summary of the major points of the tentative agreement is attached, and now be it resolved that the Trempealeau County Board of Supervisors hereby ratifies the labor agreement between Trempealeau County and WPPA, the original being on file in the County Human Resources Department.
And this committee, it had to be reviewed at exec finance because they weren't part of the bargaining, but we were intimately involved, so we'll wait till Ron gets back to make a motion related to that. In the meantime, what about turnover report, events, exciting stuff, anything?
Turnover report was sent out in your packets.
Yep.
Brief overview, we filled 35 full-time positions this year, 5 part-time fill-in, and 9 limited term. You can see all of our open positions there, so we are quite busy in our office. As far as events go, open enrollment is coming up beginning September 27th through the week of October 22nd. I also will be attending the Wisconsin Association County of Personnel Directors Conference in Oshkosh, October 14th and 15th. Other
Whoa,
than that,
it's going to be slightly understaffed during that open enrollment.
yes, this will be our very, very busy time of the year between now and the end of December.
Excellent. And you shared with me in a conversation that it's not always easy getting people to accept offers, even
Yes.
after they've been tendered,
Yes,
much
we-
as Patrick was suggesting.
Yes, recruitment right now is actually quite difficult. We're not seeing as many applicants as we have even in the past 4 years since I've been here. We've had a couple that have turned us down, so it's getting to be more and more difficult to fill positions.
All right, our next regular meeting would be October something. 21st, okay. You're not seeing any need for any special meetings? Don't go anywhere, Ron.
Second.
All right, we'll just, okay. We need a motion and a second to approve the resolution and send the county board on the contract negotiation. Motion by Nelson,
Second.
by Johnson. Any other discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. All right, we'll send this to the county board on Monday, right? Make sure that gets back to Krista. It is 11:37, and did, 11:36 then.
No, 26.
26, thank you. And Nikki, you got the other gentleman's name present as present at the meeting today. Be sure that gets in the minutes, in which case I adjourn the meeting. Thank you all very much.